Hi friends and newbie canners! Oh, I love saying that. So many of you friends who've been coming to my channel, I can't believe it. You're taking the bull by the horns and you are going out and purchasing new canners. And you are canning. You are canning beans, you are canning salsa, you are making jams, and you're telling me you're loving it. And I'm loving it because it's so uplifting to see you friends really go out there and take the bull by the horns and start breaking your dependence from the grocery store and choosing a back to basic approach to filling up your pantry. So it's kind of cool. Now, a lot of you friends are where I used to be. You know, you're new and you get that new canner, you take it out of the box and you're like, oh, I'm so excited, but kind of scared. And then you start the canning process and then you start having a lot of questions. And I think the problem right now is there's not a lot of consolidated places you can go to just get good solid information. Well, Starry's Off-Grid Kitchen, I've been there, I've done it. I've been canning for over 20 years. I hate to date myself, but it's been over 20 years. So I have run into every snag foo out there. All right, so guess what I'm doing today? I'm canning. We are processing some of our meat birds, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to take the camera with me today and just go through some basic canning stuff and answer all those questions. Because every day, I know, every day I get a question about canning. Let's get canning and answering some of those questions that you have. Ready? And there's always questions about the jars. I'm going to make it really simple because people are like, do I need to sterilize my jars? Do I or don't I? They get confused. I get confused. This is the simple answer. If you are doing any type of food that is going to take 10 minutes or longer, say it's a water bath and you have to process the food for 10 minutes or longer, or you're using a pressure canner, you do not need to sterilize your jars. When I was a newbie, I used to sterilize all my jars. I thought, oh, that's what you do. And I would spend so much time prepping my jars. Don't bother. If you are doing a water bath that is 10 minutes or less, then you have to sterilize your jars. But anything past 10 minutes of processing time, no sterilization. But just remember, now this is the common sense part. Clean your jars with soap and water. I do it with hot soapy water. If you have a, what are they called? A dishwasher? Oh, a dishwasher. I'm the dishwasher here. You can stick them in your dishwasher, that's fine. The other thing also remember, when you get new jars, they're not sterile. In fact, I've gotten some new jars and I've opened up the lids and I've had some shreds of glass in my new jars. So always, always, always check your jars. Make sure you wash the new ones because they're not sterile. Okay, so let's get filling these. Okay, the next answer to a very important question that does get overlooked and it's very hard to find answers to is headspace. We always forget about headspace when it comes to canning. Headspace is the space between the food and the top of your jar. Friends, newbie canners, this is so important. Don't forget about the headspace. When you are putting your food item into your jar, you need to leave enough headspace because if you don't, you're going to have exploding jars. That pressure is just going to build up and poof, it's going to pop that lid right off. If you're lucky, it's going to pop the lid off or it's going to come out the bottom and break the bottom of your jar. So when you are packing your food item in your jars, make sure there is no air pockets and really cram that food in there. That's another tip that you really need to do. It's not just about leaving the headspace, but it really is about cramming that food in there. And then what you want to do is make sure that you have enough headspace. For almost all foods, I basically, rule of thumb, I do at least 1 inch to 1.25 inches. The only food item that I've ever found that I really don't need to be concerned about headspace is jams and jellies. You can really put that up to the top of that jar and leave just about 1/4 inch and you'll be fine. The other thing to remember is if you don't pack that food in that jar, what happens, and this is amazing, because food shrinks. Yeah, that big old chicken breast or those beautiful apples that you put in your canning jar, when you pull it out, if you didn't pack it good enough in that jar, you're going to have half of fluid and tiny, tiny pieces of apple or little bit of chicken in there. Things shrink. You know, they're cooking up. So no one ever told me that as a new canning person. I had to learn the hard way. So now I go to town. I pack my jars as tight as I can. I leave that headspace, and then I am good. Okay, and here's another tip that may be overlooked because, you see, I am heating up my lids. Even if you don't have to sterilize your jars, you still have to heat up your lids. Don't forget that. And the reason being is, I'll show you right here. There's that gummy part that's on the lid that needs to be heated up so that it can seal your jars. If you don't heat it up, you're going to have some problems with sealing. You need to pay attention to, and this is where you're going to have to refer to your owner's manual, because every canner is different, and we are talking about the water level. How much water do you add to your canner? I can't tell you how much water to add to your particular canner. That's where the manual comes in. So make sure you look it up before you start canning, because here's the problem. If you don't put enough water in, you could run the risk of that canner going dry, and that's bad. Or if you put too much water in, we don't want to go there. It just means explosion time. So really be diligent about the water level. I'm using my Presto canner today because I'm only doing 9, but it doesn't make any difference if it's an all-American canner or if it's a Presto canner. You need to make sure you have a rack. I don't care what type of rack it is. It can be a rack that came with the canner like this one, and my All-American has a different type of rack, but it needs to go on the bottom. If you don't have a rack, here's a Starry tip. You can actually use a dish towel. Yep, there it is, good old-fashioned dish towel. Just put that dish towel right in your canner, set it on the bottom, and simply set your jars right on the dish towel, and it will serve the same purpose, protecting your jars from getting too hot on the bottom and basically, you know, cracking and exploding. Yeah. So, but you need to really invest in a rack. Presto canner getting ready to be processed, and then this brings about one more question, because people have asked me, Starry, if I have a bigger canner like this one here, or my All-American. When I double stack my jars, can I just double stack them on top of each other? No. Do not ever stack your candy jars on top of each other. When it comes to your Presto canner, it should come with 2 racks, one for the bottom and one for the top. So what you do is you put your one jar on the bottom, just like that. And just so you know, sometimes they don't sit upright. Okay, I'm going to warn you. They might be flopping all over the place, but that's okay. And then you put your other rack right on top, and then you put the other jars on top. If you don't have an extra rack, that's where your dish towel comes in handy. Just set your dish towel right on top of the jars, and you're good to go. Okay, now it's time to talk about venting. And as you can see, my pressure canner is venting. It's been at least 10 minutes, and all pressure canners, I don't care if it's an All-American or a Presto, it needs to be vented. After your venting period, then you're going to put on your weight. My Presto canner takes this type of weight, and my All-American takes this type of weight. So I'm just going to simply put it on. And then depending on the recipe, your recipe will dictate how many pounds you will need. But just remember, both canners need to be vented. And the only difference between a Presto and an All-American is your All-American is going to come with a gauge. And that gauge, once that canner gets up to pressure, will be reflected in here. And you're going to have jiggling. Both of them will jiggle, but once that canner is pressurized, the jiggling should be very, very infrequent. Then you know you're processing your food. Other tips. Should you store your jars with the bands or without the bands? And this is just a Starry tip. You see, I do a lot of canning. And what happens is when I keep the bands off, I end up with boxes and boxes and boxes of bands. And I don't have space for all of them. So it doesn't make sense for me to take them off. And also, because I'm using these items right away, when I use, say, half a jar of my salsa, you need a band. You need a band for in the refrigerator. So then what? Then you got to go and find some bands. So this is just a Starry tip. I really think it's easier to keep the bands on. And don't worry about rusting and everything. If you're storing your food items where it's really damp, you may have to worry about rust. But I have never had a band get stuck, ever. Okay, and the other question is, when you are canning, how tight do you put those bands on before they go into the pressure canner? And Starry just says, do not over tighten. Just snugly put them on your canning jars and then put them into your canner. Okay?